All right, so today we're going to take a deep dive into, you know how the hot Latina stereotype has evolved in media?
Okay.
You've sent over some really interesting sources.
Right.
There's this academic paper that just kind of really digs into the history of this whole stereotype.
Yeah.
And we're going to use that lens to kind of look at some specific examples like Gloria from Modern Family, Lynn from Vida, which is on Stars.
Okay.
And we'll even touch on some of the iconic women that are featured in that documentary, The Latin Explosion, A New America.
Wow. That's a lot to cover.
I know, right? I'm excited, though.
Yeah.
The most surprising thing to me, I think, was that the academic paper actually argues that the hot Latina stereotypes isn't always a negative thing. Like, in fact, it can sometimes be a source of empowerment and cultural pride.
Okay.
And I have to admit, that wasn't my first thought, so I'm really curious to see how the author kind of backs that up.
Well, the paper argues that while this stereotype might seem limiting because it often focuses on physical attributes and personality traits like being fiery and passionate,
Right.
it has also allowed Latina actresses and performers to create this distinct and recognizable space for themselves in the entertainment industry.
So it's like this stereotype, while potentially problematic, has also become a way for Latinas to be seen and celebrated in a field that hasn't always been inclusive.
Exactly.
Okay.
And the paper dives into the idea of strategic essentialism, which basically means using a stereotype to your advantage,
Okay.
even if it doesn't represent the full complexity of a group.
Gotcha.
You know what I mean?
Yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Okay, so how does this strategic essentialism play out in real life?
Well, let's take Gloria from Modern Family, for example.
Okay.
You familiar with the show?
Oh, yeah.
Okay, so Sofia Vergara's portrayal of Gloria has become iconic.
Yeah.
She really leans into that hot Latina image, the accent, the passionate personality, but she does it in a way that feels both comedic and empowering.
Yeah, Gloria definitely owns her identity.
Yes.
And she's not afraid to challenge people's expectations.
Exactly. And the paper argues that by doing so, she's subverting the stereotype.
Okay.
It's not just about being hot.
Yeah.
It's about using her wit and personality to turn the tables and make people laugh with her, not at her.
I remember that hilarious episode where Gloria tries to tone down her accent and speak in a more American way.
Yes.
And it just feels so wrong.
Oh, totally.
Like it takes away from who she is.
Totally. And that perfectly illustrates how Gloria uses the stereotype strategically.
Okay.
She could try to fit into a more acceptable mold,
Right.
but she chooses to embrace her accent and her culture.
It's like she's saying, this is me, take it or leave it.
Right. And that confidence is a huge part of what makes her so appealing. She's not letting the stereotype define her. She's defining it on her own terms.
I love that.
Yeah.
So we've got this academic framework for understanding the stereotype, and we're starting to see how it plays out in a show like Modern Family.
Right.
What other examples can we look at?
Well, let's move on to Lynn from the Star show Vida.
Okay.
She's another fascinating character who embodies that hot Latina look, but she also possesses a lot of depth and intelligence.
Gotcha.
And the show itself is really interesting because it explores the lives of these two Mexican-American sisters in East Los Angeles. They're dealing with all these issues like gentrification, sexuality, and cultural identity.
So Vida seems to be tackling some pretty complex themes.
Yeah.
Where does Lynn fit into all of this?
Lynn is definitely the more free-spirited of the two sisters,
Well,
and she embraces her sexuality and her sensuality, but the show is careful not to reduce her to just her appearance.
Okay.
There's a scene where she's flirting with a guy, and she talks about the word diosa, which means goddess.
Right.
And it's such a powerful moment because she's owning that word, but she's also making it clear that she's more than just a pretty face.
It sounds like Vida is trying to present a more nuanced view of what it means to be a Latina in today's world.
Yes.
Yeah.
And that's what makes it so compelling.
Yeah.
It's not shying away from the stereotype, but it's also challenging it by showing the full range of experiences and identities within the Latina community.
This is also fascinating.
Yeah.
I'm already starting to think about the hot Latina stereotype in a whole new light.
That's what we're here for.
Yeah.
And we haven't even touched on the documentary The Latin Explosion yet.
Right.
That's where we really see how Latinas have used this stereotype to achieve incredible success in the entertainment industry.
Okay, I'm definitely ready to hear more about that.
All right.
Yeah. It's amazing to see how these women have really taken ownership of their image and their careers.
Yeah.
But I'm curious, like, in the context of this strategic essentialism idea,
Yeah.
does the documentary touch on how they might have faced pushback or challenges along the way.
Oh, absolutely. The documentary shows how these women navigated this really tricky landscape. Especially in the early days of their careers,
Right.
they often had to play into the hot Latina stereotype to even get a foot in the door.
Yeah.
The roles that were available to them were often really limited
I can imagine.
and sometimes even demeaning.
Yeah. So it's like they had to use the stereotype to their advantage initially, even if it meant accepting roles that might have felt stereotypical.
Precisely.
Yeah.
The documentary shows how Jennifer Lopez, for example,
Yeah.
started out as a dancer on In Living Color,
Right.
which,
A show that really...
a show that often played up her looks and her curves.
Yeah.
But she used that platform to showcase her talent.
Okay.
And eventually she was able to leverage her fame to transition into singing and acting, taking on more complex and diverse roles.
That's a great example of how these women used the limited opportunities they were given to create bigger opportunities for themselves.
Exactly. It speaks to their resilience
Yeah.
and determination. They weren't content to be pigeonholed.
Yeah.
And they used their visibility to push for greater representation and challenge the industry's really narrow view of Latina actresses.
This is all so inspiring, but I also want to acknowledge that the hot Latina stereotype, even when used strategically, can still be problematic, right?
Yes.
Like it feels like it could reinforce the idea that Latinas are primarily valued for their physical attributes.
You've hit on a crucial point.
Okay.
And it's something the academic paper acknowledges as well.
Right.
While it argues for the potential benefits of strategic essentialism,
Yeah.
it also recognizes the potential downsides.
Okay.
There's always a risk that relying on a stereotype, even in a positive way,
Right.
can limit the range of roles and opportunities that are available to Latinas.
So it's a double-edged sword.
Exactly. It's about finding a balance.
Yeah.
The documentary highlights how women like Shakira and Rita Moreno have also been really outspoken advocates for broader representation and for challenging the limited ways in which Latinas are often portrayed. They've used their platforms to speak out against stereotypes and to promote a more nuanced and inclusive view of Latina identity.
It's incredible to see how they've used their voices to create positive change.
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that the hot Latina stereotype is just one aspect of the larger conversation about representation.
Yeah.
We need to see more Latinas in diverse roles in all their complexity and humanity.
I completely agree. So circling back to our examples,
Right.
it sounds like Gloria in Modern Family, even though she embodies some aspects of the hot Latina stereotype, is still a complex and well-rounded character.
Yes.
She's funny, she's passionate, and she's fiercely protective of her family.
Right. And while she might play into certain stereotypes for comedic effect, she also subverts them by being intelligent, resourceful, and a strong voice of reason in her family. The writers have given her depth and agency.
And what about Lynn from Vida?
Okay.
How does the show navigate the complexities of the hot Latina stereotype with her character?
Well, with Lynn, the show explores this tension between embracing sensuality and being defined by it.
Okay.
She's a confident, successful businesswoman, but she also struggles with her family's expectations and the pressures of living in a gentrifying neighborhood.
Right.
The show doesn't shy away from the fact that she uses her looks to her advantage sometimes.
Yeah.
But it also shows the emotional cost of that strategy.
So Vida is presenting a more nuanced and layered perspective on the stereotype.
Yeah.
Acknowledging both its potential benefits and its potential pitfalls.
Exactly. And that's what makes it such a valuable contribution to the conversation.
Right.
It's not offering easy answers
Yeah.
or simple solutions. It's showing the messiness and the complexities of navigating these issues in real life.
It sounds like both Modern Family and Vida, in their own ways, are trying to move beyond the one-dimensional portrayal of the hot Latina stereotype. They're showing these women as multifaceted individuals with their own strengths, weaknesses, and ambitions.
Absolutely. And that's ultimately what we need to see more of.
Right.
Latinas in all their diversity and complexity, breaking free from the limitations of stereotypes and shaping their own narratives.
I love that.
Yeah.
It's about reclaiming the narrative and defining what it means to be a Latina on your own terms.
Exactly. And that's a powerful message to send.
So we've talked about how the hot Latina stereotype could be both empowering and limiting. And we've seen how actresses and performers have navigated this complex image. It's been a fascinating journey so far.
It has. And I think we've uncovered some really important insights along the way.
Yeah, it really feels like this deep dive has given us a much deeper understanding of how this stereotype functions in media.
Yeah. And we've seen how Latina actresses and performers are actively shaping the narrative,
Right.
using their platforms to challenge stereotypes and advocate for more nuanced representation.
Exactly. They're showing the world that Latinas are not a monolith, you know?
Hello.
They're diverse, they're talented, and they're making their voices heard.
And that's so important because representation matters. When people see themselves reflected in media, it can be incredibly empowering. It can inspire them to pursue their dreams and challenge the status quo.
Yeah, I think about all the young Latinas watching these shows
Right.
and seeing these powerful women on screen.
Yeah.
It must be so inspiring for them to see that they can be anything they want to be.
Absolutely. And it's not just about Latinas seeing themselves represented, it's about everyone seeing the full spectrum of Latina identity beyond the narrow confines of stereotypes.
So to wrap things up, it seems like the hot Latina stereotype, while potentially limiting, can also be a source of strength and pride. It really depends on how it's used and who's controlling the narrative.
Exactly. The examples we've discussed show how Latina actresses and performers have taken the stereotype and turned it on its head, showcasing both their sensuality and their multifaceted talents. It's about agency and using your platform to redefine what it means to be a hot Latina.
It's been so fascinating to see how they've challenged expectations and created more nuanced and empowering representations. And it's clear that the conversation about representation is ongoing.
It is. And we need to keep pushing for more diverse and authentic portrayals of Latinas in media. The hot Latina stereotype can be a part of that, but it can't be the only story.
Well said. This deep dive has given us a lot to think about, and I'm sure our listener feels the same way. So to leave them with a final thought-provoking question. Can a stereotype, even when used in a positive way, ever truly be empowering? Or does it always carry some element of limitation?
That's such a great question. And I think it's one that we all need to grapple with as we continue to engage with media and its representations. There are no easy answers, but it's a conversation worth having.
Absolutely. So to our listener, keep exploring, keep questioning, and keep the conversation going. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive into the hot Latina stereotype.